Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a Sunday morning here with Kevin Flaherty. We're going to break down everything that we saw on Saturday from KU football. The Jayhawks lose to TCU 38-27 at Arrowhead Stadium. KU's losing streak is now at 4 games. It's KU's longest losing streak since the 2022 season. Kevin, I feel like we've already done a podcast of you and I just chatting before, so we're probably going to rehash some of this stuff. But I don't even know where to start. We could start on defense. We could start on offense. We could talk some special teams, officiating. Kevin, this game gave us a lot to talk about. I'll let you pick. Where do you want to get this thing started?
Yeah, I think I'll start from a general point of view, just in that I think the previous 3 losses and this loss were different. And that I think that the previous 3 losses were all games where you looked at it and you said Kansas was arguably the better team, in some cases almost inarguably the better team. I know a lot of people follow Parker Fleming, Stats O War on Twitter, and he always tweets out, how bad did we lose, basically, which shows the win probability stuff. Kansas was better than Illinois, in that thing. It basically said, hey, Kansas should have beaten Illinois. Kansas did not, spoiler alert, beat Illinois. I thought Kansas should have beaten UNLV and had a lot of chances there and didn't. I thought Kansas being up 11 against West Virginia. You and I talked last week about the win percentages involved with that, and losing that. Kansas should have won that game.
Yeah.
This one, Swain, TCU was the better team. And I think that as much as we want to talk about officiating, as much as we want to talk about play calling, as much as we want to talk about different things where we say Kansas had its chances here, and Kansas did have its chances with the way the game played out. TCU outgained Kansas almost 2 yards a play. TCU had explosive plays kind of whenever they wanted them. I think when you look at the overall picture here, I don't see this as a game like the others where you say Kansas should have won this game and didn't. To be quite frank, Swain, without KU forcing those 3 turnovers, really, as you suggested before we got on air, 4 turnovers when you look at a missed field goal being in there. Leipold would argue 5 turnovers with a certain overturned fumble. With you forcing all of those turnovers, that allowed Kansas to be in this game, a game that Kansas, quite frankly, probably shouldn't have been in with the way things played out.
Yeah, exactly. And I pulled up the numbers for the YouTube audience, and it's not super pretty, right? Or you're right, Kevin. Like, you could look at the other losses and say, KU was the better team. 1 or 2 moments go their way, it's a win. This game feels very, very different, like you said, because of the turnover battle and KU all of a sudden getting the flurry of turnovers. And you still look at it and say, man, Kansas got primo field position. I think probably the best way to describe it, Kevin, is that one drive after, not even a drive, a series, after O.J. Burrows had that interception, it sets up the offense inside the 10-yard line. Under no circumstance should you have a field goal in that situation. And it just, I think, showcases how KU squandered those opportunities, because TCU hand-wrapped and gifted you a touchdown, right?
Yep.
With the way KU's running the ball, you run the ball 3 times, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get in the end zone. And Devin Neal doesn't see the field. And that for me is just mind-boggling. I don't understand it. How does your best player not see the field in a tie game when you need a score? I don't understand it. And so it just embodies probably big picture. Things just were not right for KU in this game. And it comes from top down, right? I think coaching decisions, we could talk some about that. Talk about players executing, right? I don't think the wide receivers helped Jalen out. I don't think Jalen helped himself sometimes defensively, missed tackles, missed assignments. Like, it was just a sloppy game from KU overall. And that's how you lose a game, when you have a 3-1 turnover margin. And, I'm of the opinion that missed field goal, it's kind of like a turnover because the other team didn't score and they didn't punt. So it's just one of those situations, Kevin, where it's a team that played really bad football, like in
Yeah.
all three phases. And it's really the first time this season that's happened. And I mentioned that in the video post game last night. Like, this is the first time special teams has popped up and it's been like an issue. And so this is just probably the sloppiest game I think KU's played this year. And that's in and of itself is very concerning, considering I think everyone felt like this game was a backs against the wall game.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I think, to your point on Devin Neal not being on the field, I think not only is he KU's best player, I think he's KU's best short yardage runner because of the way he can kind of pick and slide. Even if you don't have a hole, he's a guy that can make somebody miss in a hole and get that yard or two. They run Daniel Highshaw once. On second down, Swain, they kind of max protected, kept everybody in, only put two guys out into the pattern. Nobody was open. Jalen kind of tried to force the ball a little bit, and then third down, you run a little pivot route to Skinner. It gets knocked down at the line of scrimmage, and you're kicking a field goal. And you look at it and say, do you really not trust Devin Neal to get 6 yards on 3 carries? And so I think we talked about it before the show. I think there are a lot of people that are very willing to heap blame onto Grimes, and specifically for his in-game play calling. I think situationally there have been some mistakes. Certainly, people want to talk about the 3rd and 4 against West Virginia, the bubble screen at times against Illinois, the not running the ball enough in situations where it seems like you should run it.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is actually more of a big picture thing. I think the biggest issue is that when Kansas had Andy Kotelnicki, Kansas had a system that was wholly unique from everybody else in the Big 12. And that gives you an advantage in preparation every week, right? Because when somebody is preparing for you on a week's time, try to teach, 35 defensive college players how to stop the option in a week's time when they aren't used to seeing it. It gives you an advantage, and you can build all the counters and everything off of it. And Andy Kotelnicki wasn't a perfect in-game play caller, which I think a lot of people are forgetting now. You think about the red zone stuff against Texas Tech last year was a very real issue, and potentially even a reason they lost that game. But I think holistically, as much as people want to say, hey, you need to call this play in this situation or give the ball to that guy in this situation, I think the bigger issue, Swain, is that KU's system right now is not divergent from what a lot of other Big 12 teams are doing. And so you see that more often. You can see people preparing for that more. Oh, yeah, we got Kansas this week. Well, what they're doing looks a little bit like A, B, and C that we've played for or prepared for. You couldn't do that in previous years with what Kansas's system was, because it was so different.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, Kevin, and I thought about this when I was looking at some of the stats, the jet sweeps are gone.
Yeah.
Like, when was the last time, like, did we see him against West Virginia? Like, I don't recall. Screen passes, basically gone. I think KU threw one yesterday.
I don't think they
The
threw
things
any.
that
I went back and watched. They had a couple short throws, but I don't think any of them were screens. Like, one was like a clear out kind of, that was a short throw. But yeah, I mean, it was they moved the screen, and they certainly moved the RPO bubble screen. Just yeeted it into the distance. So,
and that's a look. The screens were not working, but you can't tell me some of the jet motion stuff KU is doing wasn't working. And it's just interesting to watch this offense now and how it has gone. The things that Jeff Grimes was supposed to bring, right? The screen game, jet motion, things like that. That has now gone by the wayside, right? And is very much now, this is looking like more or less what Kansas has done at a very fundamental level. And to me, Kevin, the thing that is so interesting is that we're seeing KU really run the ball well. And if you go back to the first half, right, KU averaged, I think, 5 yards per carry in the second quarter alone. I think in the first half here, I can pull it up real quick. It was, 6.2 yards per carry in the first half.
Yep.
And it felt to me, Kevin, like KU got away from it.
Yeah.
And I think at times you get in a situation where, it would be a 5-yard run on first down and then a deep shot, and then it's 3rd and 5, and it's an incompletion and you're punting.
Yep.
And for me, like, it just feels like this game, and you can look at the run totals, right, that I've got there for you. Like Daniel Highshaw and Devin Neal combining for 27 rushing attempts.
Yep.
Like, that feels like that should have been in the 30s. And granted, some of that's going to be.
Brooks had 32 carries yesterday for Texas Tech by himself.
And that's the thing, Kevin. Like, KU's got 2 great running backs, and so obviously you're going to get Daniel Highshaw some looks, and he's looked good this year. But to me, this just felt like a game where KU had success in one thing and then kept like getting to it, and then they kind of like nudge back and go back to some of the passing stuff. And look, Jalen was not crisp throwing the ball downfield. And I think it was 33% completion percentage on throws 10 plus yards down the field in this game. I'm pulling it up real quick, but I think that's something that was multiple things at once, right?
Sure.
KU's wide receivers did not help him out. Quentin Skinner did not help him out with the drop. Lawrence Arnold did not help him out with the drop. But look, I think at the end of the day, like, Jalen had Quentin Skinner open on one of those routes we've seen KU run a lot, one of those deep outs, and he just threw it short, and there's nothing really Skinner can do. And in this game, Jalen was 5 for 20, 25% completion rate on throws 10 plus yards down the field. You're just not going to win football games, Kevin, if your quarterback can't push the ball down the field, because teams are just going to stack the box like TCU did in the second half, and they're going to make life really hard on you. And it's going to come down to really executing really tough plays, and that is so hard to do on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and Lance Leipold talks all the time about complementary football, right? And one of the things that we'll get to with the defense, I thought the defense had some depth issues, particularly at linebacker. They were in a position where they could get worn down. This was a game, Swain, where you wanted to run the ball. It was against a team that struggles to stop the run. And I think, too, there are a couple things that factor into this. Kansas has struggled at times to run the ball when they really need to run the ball at the end of games. In this game in particular, I really think if they had run the ball over the course of the game like you're talking about, potentially you have some fatigue things. TCU doesn't have a deep defense. And so maybe you're running the ball into a tired defense in the fourth quarter if you really stick through it and cultivate that, rather than, and I get Jalen's passing attempts are a little inflated because he was throwing the ball late. I do get that, but I still would have liked to see more of a spread there in terms of the number of times that you're running the ball versus the number of times you're throwing the ball. I thought you brought up great points on Jalen. There were a few times the play call didn't help him out. There wasn't really open stuff, and not open stuff that he throws really well. One of the interesting things I think, and maybe some of this has been pulled back a little bit because of his struggles with turnovers, but Swain, where's the middle of the field game? You look at where Quentin Skinner and where LJ Arnold have kind of eaten, over the course of their careers at KU. You look at where Mason Fairchild ate over the course of his KU career. A lot of those throws over the middle of the field, they just aren't there. He isn't getting those opportunities. And so even when he's pushing the ball down the field, so often it's a sideline throw. And so you're having to push the ball even further out there. So I think the play calling is part of it too. There aren't a ton of easy completions built into what they're doing right now. Like you said, the receivers aren't helping. I get Ryan Williams is an absolute freak of nature who plays for Alabama. But look at the game-winning touchdown against Georgia. That was a 50-50 ball that they threw up on the sidelines. That's something KU throws all the time. Hey, it's one-on-one, go make a play. Kansas's receivers haven't been making that play. They haven't been helping him out on that. You brought up the drops. There was also the route where Devin kind of, I think, lost the ball in the sun. It looked like there was potentially a play there. He slowed down a little bit and then never really located it. There was an incompletion for Jalen that should have been a pass interference with Skinner in the end zone, where Skinner gets the call if he just comes back to the ball and he kind of faded away from it. They're not going to give you that call if you don't show some effort to come back to the ball. And so when you look at that, I thought Pro Football Focus grades, I think, are really hit and miss, and I think you'd agree with me on that. I thought Jalen's grade, where it said that he was kind of above average, I thought that was roughly maybe I thought he was average. I didn't think he was awful, but I also didn't think because I saw those other factors and things playing in, but I also didn't think that it was a typical Jalen Daniels performance. But you think about the Quentin Skinner drop on the deep play, right? Maybe Jalen's best throw was the ball to LJ Arnold that got overturned on the day. You have a couple of those, you take away some of the throwaways. If we're looking at these numbers here and they're closer to, 18 for 28 for 230 yards,
Yeah.
we're looking at it a little differently. And so, and that was in play. And so I do think that there were some things there that maybe he wasn't quite as bad as the numbers reflected. But the flip side of all of that is, Swain, it all goes back to this is a game where you could run the ball, and this is a game where you should have run the ball.
Yep, exactly. And quickly on Jalen, like I think it all depends on what your baseline is for his performance, right? If you're saying based on this season and what we've seen this season, then yeah, I think it was an average game.
Yep.
If we're saying for his career, it's below average. But I think all we have to do is go off of what has happened this year, and I think just this offense. I don't know, Kevin. Like watching some of the body language too in the second half, like just had me a little like that was not what you want to see from a team that still has half a season to play.
Yeah.
And now you go on the road to play Arizona State, then you got a bye week, and maybe coming out of the bye week, something big's going to change. That's not me saying because I know something. That's just a bye week's a chance to take a closer look at things. But for KU, it just feels like the offense right now has become very, very predictable, right? They start the game well. I wrote about this for VIP subscribers, right? They start the game well, typically, and then things kind of just trickle down from there. And then coming out of half, typically it's pretty decent, and then things kind of just trickle down. And it's hard to win football games, Kevin, if you can't, score outside of times when you can, really kind of script plays and sit down and talk through things at a much more deeper level. And for KU's offense right now, there's just been a struggle to kind of do that consistently. And it's just, it's a challenge, right? It's tough to score. And if you're not scoring in the 30s in the Big 12 right now, you're not winning football games. And KU's basically a team that's kind of averaging mid-20s for points, 28, 27, 26 points a game.
Yep.
Not good enough.
Yeah. It makes it really tough to win. You have to be almost perfect defensively to do that. And as I'm sure we're getting ready to get into, Kansas was far from perfect defensively. One of the things I think you look at there is getting into the defense is KU's lack of tackles for loss and just the sheer number of explosives that the TCU put up. And look, we talk to Brian Borland every week, and one of the things that he said this past week was teams are going to earn some explosives, but you want them to be because that guy just made a play. He's on scholarship too, as opposed to making a mistake that leads to an explosive. And right now, Swain, KU's just making far too many mistakes that lead to explosives.
Exactly. Yeah, Kevin. I mean, we can dive into defense now. Like you said, I mean, I don't know about you, Kevin, but this game defensively looked just like I thought it was going to look.
Yeah.
Right. TCU comes out, quick throw game, RPOs over the middle, attacking KU. That little soft spot kind of behind the linebackers and between the linebackers and safeties. And it just looked like like you thought, right? TCU's got sweet wide receivers. They got really good players. Their quarterback's really solid. He had some really bad turnovers, but I think he's a solid playmaker. And this was going to come down to how well KU secondary plays, and they did not play well, Kevin. I think Mello didn't have a great game. OJ Burrows didn't have a great game. Jalen Dye didn't have a great game. Like, it's just one of those where you needed your secondary to have a B plus to or higher game to really have a solid defensive performance. And I think in the end, you probably got C minus, a D plus from them, and that's just not good enough.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you gave up 7 explosives that led to 220 yards, and that's using like the pure like base level definition of explosives. I just use 20-yard plays. Some people define it as 10 plus yard runs or 15 plus yard runs. I just straight up use 20-yard plays. There were 7 plays of 20 or more yards the TCU had on those drives. By the way, Swain, TCU got 3 of their 4 offensive TDs on drives that they had an explosive play.
Wow.
And that doesn't include the punt return touchdown, which of course was an explosive play. And
That's a
so
very explosive play.
those are strictly explosive plays put up by the TCU offense. And so when you look at that, the offense is making life too hard, I think, because they aren't generating enough explosives. But my gosh, the defense is making life too easy. And one of the things that was really frustrating, I think, for a lot of people about Brian Borland when he came in, when this staff came in, was KU was allowing, these 12 play drives, the 14 play, where you just die of paper cuts. And he said, hey, this is kind of who we want to be. We want to limit explosives, and that gives us a chance to get off the field. At the time, they just weren't talented enough to get off the field. And now you see more talent on there, but they haven't been able to hold up that same part of the bargain. They aren't able to limit those explosives. And I'll be frank with you, Swain. I saw that you wrote something about safety being really disappointing. Safety may be the most disappointing position on this football team based on where my expectations were coming into the season and what they've been able to do, especially the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you're going to count Marvin Grant as more of like a linebacker in this big picture, then yeah, I really do. Like, it's like the angle. If you go to the first touchdown for TCU, the angle OJ Burrows takes is just bad. Like, he has no chance of making the tackle. And I just think for KU secondary, Kevin, like, I know the missed tackle numbers don't look that bad, but if you watch the game, you saw a lot of missed tackles from KU's players in the secondary. And it's just different in how confidence can change things, Kevin, because I think earlier in the year, right, kind of weeks 1, 2, 3, felt like, hey, the secondary's tackling, right? They're meeting the challenge. And now that we're in kind of the middle part of the year, right, the body's probably not feeling great right now. The tackling has gone by the wayside. And as a result, you see TCU, I mean, their players just getting yards after contact here and there. And it's just not good. And something I thought was interesting, Kevin, is, Leipold postgame was talking or was asked about how KU keeps allowing scores at the end of halves. And he started to say, well, something about soft coverage. And then he kind of pivoted to talk about something different. But that little hint there just, for me, hit the nail on the head. Like, KU plays soft coverage. And right now, guys are just eating it up. And then when you miss tackles in soft coverage, that's a recipe for a 59-yard touchdown that really does ice the game. So it's just one of those things, Kevin, where all these things are coming together now, and some of those issues you didn't see early in the year are now kind of popping up, and things are not trending in the right direction.
Yeah, and I do think they wore down over the course of the game. And once, when looking at all the injuries at linebacker, the story about Taiwan Berryhill, obviously it's up on fog.net if people want to look at it. It's an interesting deal about sort of his route to get back to the game after attending his mother's wedding.
Yeah.
He played 72 snaps, and that was
every snap.
I don't think that was ideal. Like, and I'm not blaming the coaches. That was what they had. When you look at the guys that were injured in that linebacker room, was that Taiwan Berryhill had to play every snap at linebacker, despite getting up at 2 a.m. basically to get ready to fly back to Kansas City. And so I think that that's another thing that you can look at from the offensive side of things, where playing complementary football, you run the ball to shorten that game to make sure that those guys don't get worn down. Defensively, I did think they wore down late, and that was when TCU was able to run the ball. Prior to that, though, Swain, and God forbid we mention something positive, in a game like this. But prior to that, Kansas really did, and TCU does struggle to run the ball, but Kansas really did a nice job of making TCU one-dimensional and taking that run game away. I thought the defensive tackles, for the most part, played really well, even with TCU spreading out the box the way that they do, to where KU didn't necessarily have numbers to stop the run. They still stopped the run. And so I thought the tackles played pretty well. I'm going to mention Keenan Caldwell got done a little by Pro Football Focus. Didn't credit him with the pressure. The interception that Mello Dotson had, was basically because Keenan Caldwell took a very large human being and essentially moved him right into Josh Hoover's lap. And Hoover couldn't really step into the throw, kind of had to get rid of it. And that was when Mello made the play. He didn't get a pressure for that one. Keenan, I see you. That was a great play. But no, I think the tackle group, it's something to be excited about a little bit too, because you have 5 guys playing 15 or more snaps in this game at that tackle position. The depth there is really good. I think, JB Brown, the interesting thing with JB is he's been able to factor in to a pass rush that has really been needing an extra oomph to it, because they aren't getting there with 4. And this was the second consecutive game where we saw him have an impact in pass rush. I'm interested to see, as DJ Warner, as by Job, as they start to get a little more into the season, whether they get a little more comfortable and are able to supply a little more pop there. They didn't really pressure Hoover a whole heck of a lot, and Hoover was able to go down the field pretty well. It wasn't like he was just getting the ball out of his hands really, really quickly. And so I think the secondary had its issues, like we talked about. Kobe played okay, obviously had the forced fumble. The defense, the pass rush wasn't necessarily there, but I did think the tackles really helped with stopping the run.
Yeah, they did. And you mentioned DJ Warner there. Obviously, now he is burned his red shirt, played in 5 games. He played the most snaps he has played all year. I believe it was 24, 25, something like that. So he played a lot more. Obviously, by Joe played 13 snaps, played a lot more. That, you're right, Kevin, that is something to watch. And look, it's a for the future type of vibe with that. But like, you can look and watch those 2 guys and you can see, I think, over the next couple weeks, right, look and see if those guys are starting to show up a little bit more as they both get more comfortable playing college football. Because look, they're both still super young in their college football careers. Like, By Job has a year on DJ, but he has like 4 snaps in terms of experience. So they really are at the same level in terms of college football experience.
And maybe that's an area where you talked about coming off the bye week where there are changes. I'm not saying that would be a huge or a wholesale change, but maybe that's something that coming off the bye week and then going to see Houston, where you start seeing those guys getting more snaps. I'm not saying we'll come out of it and, hey, the depth chart says By Job is number 1 opposite Jeremy Robinson or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's an area where potentially those guys could come out of that break and take a step forward.
Totally. And on JB Brown, I mean, he is a dude.
Yes.
Like, he is making huge plays. You're right. In the pass rush, he's making plays as a pure linebacker. He is making plays. He is big, fast, and physical. And he has been a really, really great pickup for KU. Even going back to last year, I think a little maybe hotter and colder. That's terrible. Whatever. Hot and cold last year. This year feels like he's been a little bit more consistent. I think he's having a really, really good year, and he is someone that is such a weapon for KU because of the way they can use him, where he can go and blitz. He can go and take a running back into the flat. Like, there are just different things he can offer you that are really positive. And it is, I don't know, Kevin. It's just one of those things where I was not expecting going into the year to be talking about the secondary as the unit that's like, man, disappointing. I thought maybe I thought maybe it'd end up being maybe linebacker. And I just don't think, I think Cornell, when he's been healthy, has looked good. JB Brown has looked good when healthy. And I think you just see how good those two are. And I think missing Cornell was a huge deal yesterday. He's not a guy that gets a lot of talk because of, middle linebacker, first year starter, but he's been so solid for KU. And I really think they missed him in the middle yesterday.
Yeah, I agree, because not only does he do a lot of the things that they miss from Rich Miller in terms of leadership, getting guys aligned, all of those things, he's a much better athlete than Rich
Yeah.
Miller was, and I think that his versatility and what he can do back there really helps it. And that's even before just saying, hey, it would have been nice not to have your middle linebacker have to play 72 snaps right after coming back from a wedding. But yeah, it's I do think there's a little bit of all of that there, that they missed him. I think the secondary, like you said, has been disappointing the last couple weeks, because you didn't really feel like West Virginia had a whole lot of advantage in terms of the receivers working against KU's DBs heading
Yeah.
into that game. And then you wind up giving up so many explosive plays in the passing game in that one. And you look at the Illinois game, the explosives in that game were earned, right? When you have a receiver making a one-handed catch on the sideline when you've got pretty good coverage, that's an earned explosive. That's not a given away explosive. And so I think that and then UNLV, Sluka missed on a couple probable opportunities in that game, but at the same time, UNLV's got a wide receiver as good as anybody has, and he didn't impact that game. And so I think when you look at all of that, the secondary has really almost kind of regressed the last couple weeks. And the good news is that there's probably only one receiving core left on the schedule that's as good as TCU's. I would say Colorado, when you look at Travis Hunter and all those dudes, and Shador throwing them the ball. But other than that, I don't think anybody else has the number of quality targets that TCU has. They may have one guy who's really, really good and is tough to slow down, but I don't think that there are any teams left that have TCU's depth at wide receiver, except for maybe Colorado.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And so, should we talk a little bit about kind of the officiating and
We
everything that surrounds that?
and Lance's reaction after the game to the officiating, obviously.
So, I don't even know where to start, Kevin. So, really, for me, I think a lot of the frustration probably comes from that stretch in the game where, what was it? So there was the potential fumble for Hoover,
Yeah.
forced, then is overturned. Then they miss a field goal. Then KU gets the ball. And then there's that throw to LJ Arnold, right? Kevin, please correct me here if I'm wrong with my recollection of events. But then there's the throw to LJ Arnold. That's kind of the phantom. It looked like a catch. I really don't know what in the world they saw that made them think that. And the fact that too, it seemed like the guy on the far side of the field was the one that called it incomplete, not the guy that was standing right in front of him.
The guy who was right there called it a catch. The guy who was further away called it incomplete. And then when they met, the call was incomplete, which was huge because the play call stood. It wasn't confirmed. So the catch would have stood. And so that him overturning was a big deal. And I think it was a big deal for a lot of reasons. Leipold mentioned the momentum specifically at that point. I think even beyond that, that was probably Jalen Daniels' best throw of the day. I mean, he absolutely peppered that thing in. It was a great throw. And I think you get some confidence from that, right? Where, hey, it was a third down situation. He absolutely fires this ball in, and you have a great throw, a good catch, and your drive continues, versus, hey, we're punting this thing away.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm looking back now. So yeah, I did have that right. Man. And then, so here's the thing for me, Kevin, and I don't know if you feel the same way about this. So obviously Leipold, right, is frustrated with the first play with Hoover, right? That one's kind of 50-50 for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it was a clear that's a fumble.
Yeah.
I'd lean towards that being an incomplete pass,
I thought it
but
was incomplete pass, like on first viewing, even. Yeah.
yeah, and you're like, okay, like I understand. I don't think that's an egregious call. Um, could that have been a break that goes KU's way? Sure. But I
Yeah.
don't think that's something you could say we got, like, if you're a KU fan, you can't, or Leipold, you can't say we got screwed on that one. I think that's more of a look. I think they ended up on the right call. The Arnold one's terrible.
Yeah.
Like, that's terrible. That's a catch. And I really don't get how they can screw that up. So there's these two plays here in the span of probably five minutes in real time, Kevin, would you say?
And then you get the punt return.
Well, real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Leipold lights into the ref.
Yeah.
Basically, he walks 50 yards down the sideline to go where the officials like little stand thing that he does the review in, and is letting him have it like during the review.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first review, and then they go back and for the second one, he does the same thing, and like he is letting the officials have it again. I don't know about you, Kevin, but I don't think that's a great sign for players on the sideline.
Yeah.
Like, just in terms of focus. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm totally off base here, and this is BS. But like, for me, it's one of those things where I think letting the officials have it, sure, that's great. But it's also one of those where for KU, it's they have to go out then cover a punt, and guys didn't cover it well and weren't locked in. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I think you hit the nail on the head there. I also think too, this is something we see out of Leipold on a fairly regular basis in terms of him getting after the officials. And to some extent, I'm not saying he's the only coach that does it. Lord knows, like Nick Saban won a lot of games and he was known to get after the officials, pretty much all the time. But I
totally.
do wonder if they're diminishing returns a little bit in terms of, hey, if you're a coach that only really gets after the officials when there's an egregious call where they're like, oh my gosh, like coach is getting after me, versus you coming into a game and knowing like, okay, this coach is gonna bend my ear today because that's what this coach does, where you're already preparing yourself for it. I think there's potentially diminishing returns there as well with how you address that.
Exactly. And then look on the punt return. Yeah, is there a block in the back? Probably.
Yeah.
It's another one of those where if they flag it and this is soccer and there's VAR, right? They're not overturning that. It's one of those where if it's called, I think it can be called. It's not though, and that doesn't change the fact that there's still 10 other guys that can go and make a tackle
Yeah.
who don't. Like, that for me is the thing where that play specifically, I was like, oh yeah, this is like the focus, I guess maybe is the best way to say it, but just like the attention to detail of being in your right spot and making the tackle, the play that needs to be made, just wasn't there.
Yep.
And that caps that kind of really important swing, I feel like, in the game where it went from, missed field goal. KU's got a chance to go score. They seem like they've got a first down, right? And with LJ Arnold, they don't. They punt, score going the other way. People on the sideline probably feel like they got screwed. And that just for me felt like where things really the wheels kind of fell off.
Yeah, you talked about the body language. You're only down 8 still at that
Mm-hmm.
point. And so after that return and you give that up, like it's still a 1-score game. And yet the body language, to your point, was not where you want it to be in that situation. And I think one of the interesting things about this, and I'll bring it back to Jalen a little bit. West Virginia 2 years ago and Arkansas 2 years ago in the bowl game. Did Kansas not seem to have this feeling where, hey, it's a rough situation, we're down, but we got number 6 over here, we got a chance. Even when they were down big against Arkansas, it never felt like the team felt like they were out of that game.
Mm,
And especially, they got one score. It was, oh my gosh, we're coming back.
yeah.
And I think when people talk about the importance of chopping the head off the snake, so to speak, I think with Jalen struggling, it's not that he's changed as a leader. He's certainly a very positive kid, as we can attest. But I think that when you looked at the body language, it looked different than in other situations, maybe a year or two ago.
Mm,
Where look at Nevada last year when Kansas is in a really close game that, quite frankly, against a team that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're in this close game against Nevada. It's a super fluky game. Nevada has 34,000 fumbles that KU just can't get on, that
yeah.
should have put that game away, and yet they all looked to number 6 and said, hey, this we're good. We're good, guys. Like we're gonna score. We're gonna win this game.
Mm,
And you wonder a little bit with some of those opportunities. And I'm not saying all of them were great, Swain, but they had the ball with a chance to get the winning score against Illinois. They had the ball with a chance to drive down and get the winning score against UNLV. They had the ball with the chance to go down and get the winning score against West Virginia. And with the way all of those ended and not being able to finish those out, when it was 8 points, even with all the time left there, Swain, looking at the players, I didn't feel that confidence level that, hey, we're still in the game. And whatever
yeah.
they tell you, they may say, oh no, I didn't think it was over. Their body language said differently.
Yeah, and I think look, credit to the offense for coming back out, right, and having a drive at least that
Yeah.
gets you a field goal there. But then that's when things compounded again, and the defense allows a 2-play
Yeah.
drive that's capped by that 59-yard score.
And
And
that was more, sorry, I
you're
mixed the
good.
things up. The 59-yard score was kind of where I saw
Yeah,
where they
no
went
worries.
up 8. Yeah, that was where I kind of saw the body language just
Yeah,
sort of like, okay, it's not happening.
yeah, exactly. No, I know what you're talking about. And you're right, and that's the thing, right? I think at some point, if things continue to go against you, it is incredibly hard to mentally still have that we
Yeah,
got this feeling, right? And there
yeah,
have been so many things that have gone wrong for KU uh, in games and just the season overall that it's hard to keep that confidence. And I'm really interested to see how this team looks heading to Arizona State, right?
yeah,
It's I have no idea what the crowd situation is going to be like there, but it's a road game at a place you've never played before. It's going to be really interesting to see how this team responds next week because I think just top to bottom, right? Like I said at the top, Kevin, this was a sloppy game. A lot
yep.
of mistakes. And it's some of the same mistakes we've been talking about. And then now there's some new mistakes that have popped up as well. And that for me is one of the most concerning parts.
Yeah, and coaches will never ever say a game is must win, and a big part of that is they don't want the weight of saying a game is must win, and then you lose it, and it's like, oh well, okay, we lost the must win game. What now? But we aren't coaches, and so I feel like
Clearly.
I feel like the when you look at the Arizona State game, that's as close to a much must win as I think they may have all year. And that's for multiple reasons. One of them is this team needs something to go right, Swain. Like they're in that mental space where whether it's, them coming out and just absolutely curb stomping Arizona State and putting it all together, or it's them getting a lucky fumble bounce, or a butt fumble or something that gets them across the win. They just need something to go their way that gets them on the right side of that win-loss column. And having the bye week after that, and then Houston, you have a chance to get a couple wins potentially there if you beat West Virginia and give yourself a little bit of confidence going into Manhattan. And I think if they lose to Arizona State, you're entering that bye week with all the wrong kinds of energy, with still having those issues. Even if you beat Houston, I think with how depleted Houston is after the coaching change, I think that people will be like, "Oh, it's Houston." Like, I don't know that gives you the level of boost that you kind of need to get there. And so,
Mhm.
I don't know how you feel about it, but I really look at this Arizona State game as if they're going to go to a bowl, if they're going to turn this thing around to some extent, that game's pretty much a must win for me.
This TCU game was a must win, and they lost. So
you're like, it's done. It's done.
Well, Kevin, the schedule, and this is
No, I
the
get it.
interesting part about college football in the Big 12. I'm still not convinced that the teams on KU's schedule are actually good.
Yeah, I'm right
but
there with you.
But they've won games now, and they've looked a lot better than KU has
Yeah.
against other Big 12 teams. Where now you look at the schedule, and Colorado looks a lot better than I thought. BYU looks better than I thought they'd be. That's going to be a night Provo game, and you're probably talking about a 9:30 Central kick for that one. Like, that's going to be a tough environment to go. Like, and you look at the schedule now, and it's like, man, you're right. Easy should be clear win against Houston, clear win against Baylor, because Aranda probably won't be the head coach there. And outside of that, I can't tell you that, because the way the conference is, Kevin, KU's going to play a bunch of one-score games for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But from what I've seen,
that hasn't been good.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a lot that's been good in those one-score games to give me confidence that Kansas is going to be able to turn this around in a one-score game. So it comes down to, can you build up a lead? And I haven't seen the consistency offensively, the consistency defensively over the last 2 weeks to be able to do that. And so that for me is probably my biggest concern, big picture looking ahead, just because it got a lot more questions than answers, Kevin. And I don't know where those answers come from.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I do not envy the coaching staff on this, because I think it would be, and I think we talked about this last week, it would be so much easier if it were just Jeff Grimes, or if it were just Jalen Daniels, where you can say, okay, Jalen's not on, let's toss him in. Another quarterback would be just fine. I had somebody ask me about Jason Bean. If they had Jason Bean, would they have won yesterday? I said, probably not. When you look at all the different things, when you look at the drops, when you looked at the difference in play calling, when you looked at what the defense did, the switching quarterbacks is not necessarily just going to be the magic ray of sunshine.
Yeah.
Grimes giving play calling duties to Zabrowski is not magically going to solve the issues. And so I think that's the tough thing for the coaching staff to figure out. And quite frankly, that's why they get paid a lot more than either you or I.
A lot more.
It is. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I don't think it's clear and concise. You can say as much as you want, stop making mistakes, play clean football. But when it's so many guys, and it's like you said, it's not always the same issues, and there are new issues popping up each week. I don't know how you put everything back in the box to get it to where you want it to be.
Exactly. And that's the big thing now, right? Is they got to figure it out, because there's still a lot more weeks to go, and there's still a season that you can salvage, right?
Yeah.
A 4-8 looks a lot different than a 1-10 or a 2-9. Every win is important. And so, okay, you've got to just figure it out. I don't know what's going to take, Kevin. I really don't. There's just so much. And I think Leipold said this a few times now, and you probably just said it too. If it was one thing, it'd be pretty easy, but it's not. It's different things every time, and that's got to be the frustrating part if you're a head coach, right? You are trying to take the most big picture look at this possible every single week, and it's just not, A, it's not good enough. And B, there are different things popping up every week in different little, I don't even know what you want to call it, fires, but like different issues popping up that then you got to go and resolve. And so it's just tough.
Yeah.
It's tough top to bottom. That's what I got.
You get yelled at for not giving the ball enough to Devin Neal one week. The next week you give it to Devin Neal and he doesn't get the key yardage that you need in key situations. People are sick of the bubble screens. You take those out. Against West Virginia, you give up all kinds of pressure despite not really struggling in pass protection up to that point. you kind of fixed that this week. They did a pretty good job of keeping Jalen mostly clean.
Yeah, 3 pressures from the
I thought
offensive line.
Cable Dew had a really good bounce
Mhm.
back game,
Totally.
um, especially with how much he struggled against West Virginia. But then there are fires in other places. Like all of those are things that people said were fires at the times, and he put those out. But in week 2, the secondary wasn't a fire. In week 3, the secondary wasn't a fire. The defense in general wasn't much of a fire. And so it keeps, I think Jalen's playing better the last 2 weeks than he did against Illinois and UNLV. I'm not saying that fire is put out, but it's not engulfing your whole kitchen now. You got it back at least to on top of the pot that it started in. But then other stuff is popping up in other areas, and so it's almost the whole like whack-a-mole thing, right? Like the
Yeah,
head
yeah.
just popping up, and you're trying to hit it. I don't know what the answer is at this point, but again, Lance Leipold gets paid a lot more than I do to try and figure this thing out. So
Yeah, well, I like a lot more than you and I get paid, Kevin. I guess a word on the fans and Arrowhead.
yeah,
I thought the crowd was good. It
yeah,
was good. I think it probably, if I had to guess, probably low 40s in terms of physical butts in seats
yeah,
attendance. But considering the week, it was better than I thought, Kevin. I thought we were headed for a 30s type of
yeah.
game. But huge credit to KU fans. And they continue, Kevin, to show up, right? Think about all the expenses that have had to come on them in the
Oh
last year and a half with NIL, with having to now pay for more expensive, parking,
yeah,
$50, right? That's not
yeah,
cheap. There are a lot of things that I think, and this is probably true of college football fans everywhere right now. They are being nickeled and dimed every chance because you have to, because this is a money raising game right now, and you need to have as much money as possible to be competitive. And huge credit to KU fans for showing up and supporting, because
yeah.
it's important, right? It's one of the biggest things you can do right now is support in the various ways you are able. That doesn't mean you have to go give thousands of dollars to NIL, but if you get to the game, butts in seats, that's support. And I think KU fans deserve a ton of credit for, despite a bad start, right, 1-4 heading into this game, they're still showing up, and it's encouraging too, Kevin, for I think the long term part of the program. The fact that things haven't gone well this year, and there are still 40,000 people that are willing to make that trip to the game, I think that's really pretty big. So,
I thought it was big too. You cover Kansas specific recruiting more than I do. I cover statewide stuff, but KU had a lot of recruits there
yeah,
yesterday, and I thought that while the result didn't turn out the way that fans wanted, Leipold, the players, everybody had a lot of praise for the crowd and the atmosphere they created. I also think that it was probably a good move for KU's future in terms of those recruits getting there, and it wasn't just 30,000 people in Arrowhead looking awful.
yep. And now obviously Houston will be the next test. First game at Arrowhead. So there's still more games to go. But I think just
Another reason a win over Arizona State could be big.
honestly, really, it could be. So those are some of my thoughts, Kevin. I think, just shout out to KU fans, right? This season has not gone well. And I think, like Leipold said on Monday, when I asked him about, message to fans ahead of Arrowhead, like, if you're not frustrated with this, right, you're not a true fan that you really,
Yeah,
cares. And so obviously I think a lot of people are frustrated, and obviously everyone in the program's frustrated too. It's not gone the
yeah,
way people wanted or hoped. And thing about college football, Kevin, is like things could just flip next week.
yeah.
Will it? I don't know, but could it? Yeah, it could. So
Yeah, yeah,
see
yeah.
what happens.
I remember a wise sage named Michael Swain brought up the fact that Oklahoma State got absolutely railroaded by South Alabama last year and went on to reach the Big 12 title game. I'm not saying Kansas is going to reach the Big 12 title game. I'm just saying that, like you said, it is capable of turning around pretty quickly if
Yeah,
things, if things go right. And right
yeah,
now, I think this team needs to just see some good, and I think that could get them over maybe potentially a lot of the mental stuff that's there.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say this tongue in cheek. KU could still make the Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
Like Utah
It
lost
is
to Arizona.
on the table.
Utah,
It is on the table. It's
Utah,
like falling off the
yeah,
table, but it's on the table.
this conference sucks. It's bad.
Here's the thing, Dwayne, I can't figure out who's good, if anybody, because like you have such wildly divergent results every single week. You think that, oh my gosh, this, BYU looks incredible because they just blew out K-State, and then they should have lost to Baylor in that game. If Baylor didn't give away like 21-0 right off the bat, Baylor probably would have won that game. Colorado looks like crap sometimes and then runs UCF, which beat TCU, which, it's impossible to tell on a week-to-week basis who is actually legitimately. I mean, K-State destroyed Arizona, who beat Utah. Like, K-State again got destroyed by BYU. Like, it's one of those crazy things that it's really tough to watch on a week-to-week basis and determine who, if anybody, is any good in this conference. And so, on one hand, that hurts KU, right? Because some of the teams that we thought, like Arizona State, that we thought were going to be bad, and they haven't been bad. They haven't been as bad as we thought they'd be. The flip side of that, is that maybe some games are going to help KU, and that some of the tougher games might not be quite as tough as they thought. If they can figure things out, and Swain, that's a pretty big if at this point.
It is a big if, and what it is, Kevin, it's a circle of suck. That's what this conference is. It's a circle of suck. Like, how did Utah lose to Arizona last night at home?
I don't know.
Oklahoma State, what? Like, they've got just as much of a veteran team as KU does, and they're falling flat on their face too. They're a Sam Pittman collapse away against Arkansas from having an even worse record. Like, just the conference, man.
And Arizona beat Utah, when Arizona got crushed by K-State, who got crushed by BYU. I mean, it's all over the place. There is a Big 12 team that will reach the college football playoff because one has to reach the college football playoff. But the thoughts that any of us had before the season of multiple Big 12 teams reaching the college football playoff, I do not see any way that happens. To be quite frank, Swain, I'm not sure there are multiple Big 12 teams that are going to deserve to be ranked at the end of the year with the way that things go. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it might be that changes, but as of right now, I don't know that there's any Big 12 team that's just an absolute world beater week after week after week. They can look like it for 1 week, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who they are.
Exactly. All right, Kevin. That should do it. Let people know where can they find your stuff, Kevin? Just check out all your podcasts and everything.
Yeah, you guys can find me over at Kansas City Sports Network. I do the Pay Heed podcast, which talks about KU sports, and then also the Verbal Commitment podcast, which we plan to have Swain on here sometime pretty soon. We talk a lot about local recruiting, Kansas City, and also talk about the recruiting classes at KU, K-State, and Missouri. So,
Kevin, you got to up the NIL offer.
Yeah,
I take big bucks.
Yeah, for sure. I got to get that thing up. We're having a Sluka situation right now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm holding out. I need some McDonald's bags.
Kevin is not coming in with nearly enough barbecue to make this thing feasible.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks as always for checking out the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you are liking the video, subscribing to the channel, dropping comments down below. That always goes a long way in helping us with the old algorithm. If you're listening on a podcast platform of your choice, please leave a rating and review. Those also go a long way in helping us. I'm Michael Swain. That was Kevin Flaherty. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you all again in just a few days.